The wind had a voice. It was not a whisper, but a high, keening moan that scraped across the high plains of the territory, carrying half of Kansas with it. The sky was not blue, but a bruised, churning yellow-gray, thick with alkali dust and the ash of some distant, forgotten prairie fire. The sun was gone, smothered, leaving only a sickly, oppressive light that offered no warmth, only revelation. It revealed the land for what it was, cracked, tormented, and thirsty. Fissures deep enough to swallow a man's leg split the baked earth. Tumbleweeds, skeletal and frantic, bounded past withered clumps of sagebrush that clung to the ground like old gray wool. And it revealed the woman. She was a stark, impossible slash of white against the endless, hostile brown, or what was left of white. The dress was a ruin. What had been fine lace, perhaps pearl buttons, and hopeful silk was now a shroud of rags. The hem was gone, shredded away by thorn and rock. The bodice was stained with sweat and rust-colored dirt. She lurched more than walked. One hand held out as if to ward off the grit that stung her face, the other clutching the front of her dress in a fist that had long since gone numb. Her shoes, thin slippers never meant for anything but a church aisle and a dance floor, had vanished miles back. She did not remember losing them. She only remembered the sharp, sudden pain, and then the dull, rhythmic agony that followed. Her feet were raw, bleeding things, wrapped in the shredded remains of silk stockings that were now just bloody threads stuck to pulped skin. A length of fine netting, a bridal veil, was snagged in her hair. It whipped around her face like a living tormentor, clinging to the sweat and tears and blood, blinding her. She clawed at it, but her fingers were clumsy, and it was tangled fast in the knots of her undone hair. She did not know how long she had been running. A day, a lifetime, since the world had ended at the altar. The ground beneath her feet changed. The hard, baked plate of the prairie gave way to the softer, crumbling dust of a dry creek bed. It was a trap. Her ankle turned on a loose stone, and the last of her strength, a reserve she had not even known she possessed, evaporated. She did not fall. She crumpled. It was a surrender, a folding in, as the last string was cut. She landed hard on the stones. The air punched from her lungs in a dry sob. The world, which had been a screaming, yellow blur, went quiet. She lay by the bank of a creek that had not seen water since the last thaw, and the dust began to settle on her, burying her, second by second. She had failed. He would find her. It was, she thought with a strange, distant clarity, better to be found here, dead, than to be taken back alive. She closed her eyes. He saw her through the thinning haze. He had been riding with his head down, hat brim pulled low to shield his eyes, letting the horse, a sturdy buckskin, pick its own way. He was returning from a 3-week cattle delivery to the railhead at Abilene. He was tired. His bones ached, and he was deliberately, carefully, avoiding town. Town meant whiskey, and whiskey meant talk, and talk meant trouble. He had enough trouble. He almost rode past her. She was just a heap of white rags, another casualty of the land. A lost blanket, maybe, but the horse shied, snorting, its ears pricked forward. He pulled up, squinting. He was a rough-looking man, wide in the shoulder and quiet in his movements. His canvas duster was the same color as the plains. His face, beneath the dust and a week's worth of stubble, was hard set. He saw the shape, the impossible white. Not a blanket, a woman. He hesitated. This was the long, dangerous moment that separated a long life from a short one. A woman, alone, in a wedding dress, in the middle of a dust storm. It was a trap. It was a sickness. It was a madness. It was, without question, not his business. He had seen what happened to men who stuck their noses into other folks' trouble. He sat in the saddle, the leather creaking under his weight, the wind tearing at him. He could ride on, in an hour, The memory would be buried by the dust, just like the body. He watched her for a full minute. She did not move. He saw the tangle of the veil. With a low curse that was lost to the wind, he swung his leg over the saddle and dismounted. His boots hit the ground with a soft thud. He left the horse. It would not bolt. He approached her slowly, one hand near the holster at his hip. No ambush. No one else was near. She was small and terribly still. He knelt beside her, his knees cracking. He touched her shoulder. The silk was cold, damp. She was alive. He saw the faintest flutter of her eyelids. He was not a gentleman, but he was practical. He slid one arm beneath her knees and the other behind her back. She weighed nothing, a bundle of sticks and wet rags. He lifted her. She gave a faint moan, a sound like a broken bird, but did not wake. He carried her out of the wind, over to a shallow overhang of rock he had noted moments before. It was not a cave, just a gouge in the earth, but it was shelter. He laid her down on the dusty stone, propping her against his saddle. He unhooked his canteen and knelt beside her. He had to lift her head, brushing the tangled, gritty hair from her face. Her lips were cracked open, lined with dried blood. He poured a small amount of water over them, then pressed the canteen to her mouth. She choked, her eyes flying open. They were wide, blue, and blind with terror. She scrambled backward, crab-walking against the rock, her hands coming up to shield her face. "Easy, ma'am," he said. His voice was rough, like gravel. "Just water." She stared at him, at his face, his duster, the gun at his hip. She was breathing in short, tearing gasps. Who are you?" she whispered. "Just a man. Drink this. You're near dried up." He offered the canteen again. She watched him, her gaze darting from his eyes to the endless plain and back. She was cornered. He saw the calculation. He was one man. The world was many. He was, for now, the lesser threat. She drank. She drank with a desperate, sobbing thirst, water spilling down her chin and onto the ruined bodice. When she finished, she collapsed back, exhausted by the effort. "I need your name, man," he said, purely for practical reasons. Her face changed. The terror solidified into a new, hard dread. She shook her head, pulling the tattered veil further over her shoulder. No name," he grunted, screwing the cap back on the canteen. "Fine." He started to turn away, to check on his horse. Her hand, thin and scratched, shot out and grabbed the sleeve of his duster. Her grip was surprisingly strong. "Please," she whispered, her voice raw. "Don't take me back. Please, don't let him take me back." He looked down at her small, white-knuckled hand. He looked at her eyes, swimming with a fear so large it left no room for anything else. He had no idea where back was or who he was, and he did not ask. He just gave a single, curt nod. "I ain't taking you nowhere but out of this wind." Night fell like a hammer. The dust storm had moved on, but it left the air scoured clean and bitter cold. The land was sharp in the moonlight, a landscape of silver and black shadows. The isolation was total. There was no other light, no other sound but the weary stamp of the horse and the whistle of the high desert wind. He built a fire in the shelter of the rocks. He used dry mesquite chips from his saddlebag, and in moments, a small, economical fire crackled, painting the rock wall orange. The woman was shivering. The dress, damp with sweat and water, was clinging to her. Her teeth chattered, a sound that seemed to fill the silence. He watched her for a moment, his face unreadable in the firelight. Then he unbuckled his duster, the heavy canvas coat that was his only real protection from the elements. He shook the dust from it and walked over to her. She flinched as he approached, pulling her knees to her chest. He did not speak. He just draped the heavy coat over her shoulders. It swallowed her. It smelled of him, of horse and leather, and old smoke, and the faint, metallic tang of the trail. It was heavy, and it was warm. She looked up at him, her face a pale oval in the darkness. She clutched the lapels of the coat, but her other hand, he noticed, was still tangled in the veil. She held it bunched at her chest, like armor, like a shield she could hold against the world. He saw the gesture. He understood armor. He let her keep it. He turned his back to her and sat by the fire, facing the open dark. He took out his pistol, checked the cylinder, and laid it on the rock beside him. He would not sleep. She watched his back. It was wide and solid, and it did not move. Slowly, trembling, she pulled the heavy coat tighter and let the warmth sink into her bones. She did not sleep either. She just stared into the flames, her mind a blank, howling void. When the first gray light of dawn touched the prairie, he was already standing. The fire was out, the ashes scattered. He had his hat on. The woman was pale, her eyes bruised with exhaustion, but she was watching him. "Can you walk?" he asked. She nodded, though it was a lie. She tried to stand, using the rock wall for support, her legs, stiff and cut, buckled beneath her. She cried out, a small, sharp sound of frustration, and slid back down. He sighed. It was the sound of a man accepting a burden. "I passed a miner's hut, 2, maybe 3 days back. It's south of here. Better than this." He did not ask her permission. He stamped out the last of the embers, gathered his bedroll, and went to his horse. He pulled the buckskin closer to the ledge. "We'll have to go slow." He helped her up. She was so stiff she could barely move. He put his hands on her waist to lift her, and she went rigid, a sharp intake of breath. He ignored it, lifting her into the saddle as if she were a sack of flour. He handed her the reins. "Just hold on," he said. He did not mount. He took the horse's bridle and began to walk, leading the animal by foot. The land was parched, the isolation sharp. They were 2 small, slow-moving specks in an ocean of dead grass. He led his horse, and the woman in a ruined wedding dress, south, toward a memory of shelter. It took them all day. The sun was merciless. She drifted in and out of consciousness, her head drooping. He stopped twice to give her water. He did not speak again. The only sounds were the plod of his boots, the clop of the horse's hooves, and the dry rasp of her breathing. Late in the afternoon, he found it. The hut was barely standing, a lean-to of scavenged planks and sod, hunkered against a small rise. The door was gone, but it had 4 walls, and most of a roof. It smelled of dust and old iron and pack rats. He lifted her down from the horse. This time, she was too weak to flinch. He carried her inside and laid her on the only piece of furniture, a wooden cot layered with old, crumbling burlap sacks. "Stay," he said, an unnecessary command. He tended to his horse first, rubbing it down, giving it the last of his oats. Only when the animal was cared for did he return to the cabin. He had a small canvas bucket, which he filled from a trickling, algae-choked spring he'd found half a mile back. He built another fire, this time in the cabin's small, rusted stove. He put a pot of water on to heat. She was watching him from the cot, her eyes following his every move. He took a clean rag from his saddlebag, dipped it in the hot water, and wrung it out. He walked over to her. "This is gonna hurt." She shrank back, but there was nowhere to go. "What?" "Your feet." He did not wait for an answer. He knelt, lifted her legs, and rested her heels on his knee. He had to cut away the rotted silk of the stockings. The fabric was stuck fast with dried blood. She hissed in pain as he peeled it away, but he was quick, his hands steady. Her feet were a disaster, blistered, cut, the skin torn away. He kept his eyes averted. He kept his gaze focused entirely on the wounds. He was all business. He cleaned the cuts, his touch impersonal, almost rough, but thorough. He saw the bruises that purpled her ankles, dark and angry. He said nothing. She flinched every time his fingers touched her skin, a small, sharp tremor that ran up her whole body. She was bracing for something more than the sting of the water. He could feel it. He could feel the terror coming off her like heat. He finished with her feet and moved to her arms, which were raked and scratched from the brush. He cleaned them, too. He kept his eyes averted from her face, from her body, from the torn lace of her dress. He tended her cuts as he would a horse, with an efficient, detached focus. He was giving her his respect by not looking, by not asking, by not acknowledging the woman beneath the wounds. When he was done, he stood up. He unrolled his only blanket, a thick wool bedroll, and spread it over her. "Sleep," he said. He took his saddle blanket and settled on the floor by the door, his back to the wall, his rifle resting against his legs. He heard her shift, the rustle of the wool. He heard her try to stifle a sob, a thick, choked sound in the darkness. He closed his eyes, his jaw tight. It was not his trouble, but it was here. Sleep did not come to her as a comfort. It came as a descent, a black, suffocating pit, and in the pit, the memories waited. She was not in the cabin. She was in a church, suffocating on the heavy, sweet scent of lilies. The light was too bright, coming through the stained glass. A man's hand was on her arm, the fingers digging into her skin, possessive. She could hear his voice, a low murmur that was not a comfort, but a contract. Mine. She saw the altar, looming like a gallows. She saw the expectant faces, all strangers. She saw her father's face, pale and sweating, relieved that his debts were paid. Then the image fractured. The hand on her arm was no longer just holding. It was angry. It was shaking her. She saw the stain, a splash of red. Wine. No, not wine. Blood. Blood on the white lace of her cuff. Someone had shouted. She had screamed. And then she was running. Running out of the church. The lilies. The angry hands. Running into the screaming. Yellow dust. She woke with a gasp that tore at her throat. She was in the dark cabin. It was cold. A man was breathing in the corner. Her heart hammered against her ribs. She was trapped. She had traded one prison for another. She scrambled off the cot, pulling the wool blanket with her. She backed into the far corner, her eyes wide, searching the gloom. "He's here," she whispered, the words choked with terror. The man by the door did not move for a second. Then, slowly, he reached for the kindling. "No one's here." He struck a match. The flare of it illuminated his face, rough and shadowed. He lit the small fire he had prepared in the stove. As the light grew, she saw where she was. The cabin, the dirt floor, the man. She was shaking so hard she could barely stand. Her hand flew to her head, searching for the veil. It was on the cot. She grabbed it, the tattered, filthy piece of netting, and pulled it over her head. She wrapped it around her shoulders, hiding her face, hiding her hair. She sank to the floor in the corner, a small, shivering heap of wool and lace. He watched her for a moment. He saw the way she hid, the way she made herself small. He saw the veil, and the illusion of safety it gave her. He turned his back to her and busied himself with the coffee. The smell filled the small cabin. Arbuckles. It was the only smell in the world that was normal. It was hot and strong and bitter. When it was boiled, he poured a cup into a tin mug. He walked over to her. She was huddled, her face hidden behind the netting. He offered her the coffee at dawn, without comment. He just held the hot tin cup out to her. She stared at the cup, then at his hand. It was scarred, the knuckles busted, the skin dark from the sun. It was the same hand that had cleaned her feet. It was not shaking. Slowly, her own hand emerged from the blanket and took the cup. Her fingers were so cold they barely registered the heat. She drank. The coffee was scalding, and it burned a path straight down to her stomach, an anchor in the churning sea of her fear. They stayed that way as the sun came up, painting the cabin's single, grimy window pale gray. Him by the stove, her in the corner, hiding behind a veil. A silent agreement was made. They would stay one more day. She was in no shape to move, and he seemed in no hurry to be anywhere else. The silence in the cabin was heavy, but it was not empty. It was filled with the things they were not saying, the questions he was not asking. He busied himself checking his gear, cleaning his rifle, restitching a piece of his bridle. He moved with a deliberate, economical grace. No wasted motion. She watched him. She was no longer just a hunted thing. She was an observer. She watched the way he lit the stove again to heat a small can of beans. She watched his hands, how they were rough with his gear, but steady with the small flame of the match. He was adding a few more pieces of wood to the rusted stove, coaxing the weak fire. She stood up, pulling the wool blanket around her like a shawl. She felt an urge to help, to do something, to not be a useless burden. She reached for the small, bent piece of iron that served as a poker, to shift the wood. He reached for it at the same moment. Her hand brushed his. It was nothing. Knuckles against the back of his hand, his skin was calloused and warm. Hers was cold and soft. It was an accident, but it was the first human touch she had felt in days that was not pain, or terror, or impersonal care. It was a spark. He froze. He did not pull away, but his hand stopped, suspended in the air. She snatched her hand back as if she had been burned, a small, sharp intake of breath. He said nothing. He did not look at her. He just closed his hand around the iron poker and shoved the wood into the stove, the scrape of metal on metal loud in the quiet room. She stood there, her hand tingling. She watched him quietly. She watched the set of his shoulders, the lines around his eyes as he squinted at the fire. He was not the man from her nightmares. He was something else, and for the first time since she had fled the church, she felt a flicker of something other than pure, cold fear. It was not hope. It was just a question. The silence of the cabin stretched with the gray dawn. The accidental touch by the stove lingered in the air, a physical thing. It was a question, and it had to be answered. She was the one to speak. She sat on the cot, the wool blanket still draped over the ruined dress, the veil folded in her lap. Her voice was thin, dry from dust and disuse. "Clara!" He was crouched by the door, checking the leather straps on his saddlebags. He paused, his hands still. He looked over his shoulder. He did not ask her to repeat it. He just absorbed the name. "Clara," he said, testing the sound of it. He turned back to his work. "Wyatt." It was a simple exchange, 2 words, but it shifted the foundation of the world. They were no longer just a man and a woman, a savior and a survivor. They were Clara and Wyatt. She watched him pull a strap tight with a sharp, practical jerk. He had given her shelter, water, and warmth. He had tended her wounds and kept his eyes low. He had not asked a single question, and for that, he deserved more than a name. He deserved the truth. "It was not a marriage," she said, her voice stronger now. "It was not for love." Wyatt stopped his work. He did not turn, but she knew he was listening. "It was a deal, a bargain. My father, he died broke. He owed money. A lot of money." She stared down at her hands, twisting the edge of the filthy lace in her lap. "The man he owed his name is Malcolm Kane. He owns half the county. He owns the bank, the freight line. He owned my father." She took a shaky breath. "When my father died, the debt was passed to me, but I had nothing. Nothing but the ranch. It was my mother's land. It's dry, not much for grazing, but it was ours." She looked up at Wyatt's back. "Mister, Kane said he would forgive the debt. He said he would take the land, but he would let me stay. He would care for me. All I had to do was marry him." Wyatt slowly stood up. He turned to face her, his expression unreadable. He leaned against the rough plank wall, his arms crossed over his chest. He was just listening. "He wanted the deed," she whispered. "And he wanted me. He liked the idea of breaking me in, like a horse. The shame of it burned in her throat. He was an older man, powerful. He had hands like cold iron. He said it was a good bargain. My family's honor would be saved. I would be a respectable wife. She clutched the veil. I stood at that altar. I saw him watching me. I saw him smiling. The preacher was reading the words, and I saw the rest of my life. A small, dark room, a lock on the door. I saw him touching me. She looked away, toward the grimy window. I just ran, before I could say the words, before it was finished. I grabbed a thing from the table by the door. I hit the man who tried to stop me. I think there was blood. I just ran. I ran until the dust storm hit, and then you found me. The cabin was silent. The story hung in the small space, thick and ugly. Wyatt's gaze was steady. He did not look at her with pity. He did not look at her with disgust. He just looked at her. Kane, he said, the name a flat, hard sound. I've heard of him. Clara's blood went cold. You know him? I know of him, Wyatt corrected. I worked a drive near his holdings once. Men like that, they don't lose, they don't let things go. They bury their justice with bullets and buy the crosses from the preacher. He pushed off the wall. He's not just a man, he's a problem. He told her, then, a small piece of his own. Not a story, just a fact. I'm no stranger to that kind of trouble. Clara, I've worked for men who thought a wage bought your soul. I've seen things that make a man want to avoid towns. He gestured vaguely to the south. That's why I was riding the long way round. He was telling her, in his own way, that he understood. He understood power and corruption and the kind of violence that wore a suit and carried a gold watch. He'll have a posse out, Wyatt said, his voice practical again. He's a rich man. He'll call it concern for his new bride. He'll tell the law you're not in your right mind. He'll have flyers. He'll have men combing every trail between here and the state line. Clara trembled. She had not thought beyond running. She had not thought about the hunt. What do I do? Wyatt picked up his hat and creased the brim in his hands. You don't go south. You don't go east or west. Every town, every railhead he'll be watching. There's only one way. Where? North, into the mountains, the high country. It's hard land. But folks up there, they don't ask questions. They don't care about a man's past. A person can disappear up there. He was offering her a chance, not a rescue, a path. Can you ride? He asked. She looked at her bandaged feet. She looked at the torn dress. She nodded. I can ride. They left the cabin that afternoon. Wyatt had doctored her feet again. He'd cut strips from his own spare shirt to make better bandages, and then wrapped her feet in squares of burlap to act as crude shoes, tied at the ankle with twine. He lifted her onto the buckskin, then mounted behind her. It was a risk, riding double. It was slow and hard on the horse, but she was in no condition to walk, and he had only one mount. She sat stiffly in front of him, her back straight, not daring to lean against him. His arm was near her waist, his hand steady on the reins. She could feel the heat of his body, the solidness of his chest behind her shoulders. It was a proximity that was both terrifying and, in a strange, deep way, a comfort. He was a wall between her and the world she had fled. As they traveled, the land changed. The flat, cracked prairie gave way to rising foothills. The ground became rocky, dotted with juniper and stubborn pines. The air grew thinner, cleaner, but the sun was still a hammer, and the torn silk of her dress offered no protection. She wore it like a second skin. It was all she had. The white fabric was now a map of her journey, stained with dirt, blood, and the grime of the trail. It was a constant, humiliating reminder. Late in the third day of travel, Wyatt spoke. We'll pass near a trading post tomorrow. I can see if I can trade for some clothes. A calico. Maybe something sturdier. Clara's hand instinctively went to the tattered bodice. She thought of taking the dress off, of burning it. But then what? She would be naked, with nothing. The dress was her shame, but it was also her proof. It was the one thing in the world that was hers. "No," she said, her voice quiet but firm. "I won't trade it. It is all I own." Wyatt was silent for a long moment. He looked at the back of her head, at the veil, which she had tied around her waist like a sash to keep the rags of her skirt from flying open. He understood. It was her armor, the armor of a battle she had not won, but had survived. "All right," he said. He did not bring it up again. They did not ride double for long. He found a small, half-wild mule grazing in a box canyon, still wearing the frayed end of a rope. It took him half a day to gentle it, but he did. He rigged a halter, and Clara rode the mule. It was slow, stubborn, and rough-gaited, but it was transport. It allowed them to move faster, and it put a small, necessary distance between them. They slept under the stars. The nights in the high country were cold. The air so clear the stars looked like chips of ice. The first few nights, she slept far from him, on the other side of the fire, curled in the wool blanket. She would wake up shivering, the cold seeping in from the hard ground. Wyatt slept in his duster, his hat over his face. He seemed impervious to the cold, as still as the rocks around them. On the fourth night, the wind had a sharp, bitter edge to it. The fire was small, just enough to ward off the deepest chill. Clara could not stop shaking. She edged her blanket closer to the embers, but it was not enough. She looked at Wyatt. He was a long, dark shape. She could not hear him breathing. She could be alone out here. The thought sent a fresh jolt of terror through her. Slowly, carefully, she shifted her bedroll. She moved an inch at a time, the sound lost in the rustle of the wind. She moved until her blanket was only a foot from his. She could feel the faint radiation of his body heat. It was not enough. She inched closer, closer still, until her back was almost touching the bundled-up duster he used as a pillow. The shaking began to subside. She was not alone. She was drifting into a shallow, uneasy sleep when she felt a shift. He was moving. She went rigid. But he did not turn. He did not speak. His hand, which had been resting by his side, moved. It slid back under his own blanket, moving blindly. It was seeking something, or perhaps he was asleep. Her own hand was balled into a fist under her blanket. She felt his fingers brush the wool that covered her. She held her breath. His fingers stopped. Then, slowly, they opened. He was not asleep. It was a question asked in the dark. Clara's heart was a drum in her chest. This was a man, like Cain, but not like Cain. He had not taken, he had only given. Slowly, she uncurled her fist. She slid her hand out from under her blanket until her bare fingers met his. His hand was rough, calloused, and wonderfully warm. Their fingers found each other under the blanket. It was not a grasp. It was a simple, hesitant touch, her fingers resting in his palm, his thumb moving, just once, to brush against hers. It was an anchor in the vast, cold dark. It was a promise. I am here. You are here. She slept. For the first time, she slept without nightmares. The trading post was not a town. It was a single squat building of sod and warped lumber, with a sagging porch and a sign that just said, "Goods." It sat in a wide, windy valley, a lonely speck of commerce in a vast, empty world. "You wait here," Wyatt said. He left her with the horse and mule in a small grove of aspen trees 100 yards away. "Keep out of sight." She watched him walk toward the post. He moved with that same quiet purpose. She felt a knot of anxiety. This was the first contact with the world they had fled. Wyatt went inside. The place smelled of smoked hides, plug tobacco, and rancid bacon. A single bored-looking man with a face like dried leather sat behind a counter. Wyatt did not dally. He bartered. He had a good skinning knife and a small pouch of silver coins he had been hoarding. He traded for flour, a side of bacon, more coffee, and, most importantly, a small tin of salve and clean linen for bandages. He did not have much, but he spent it all. As the trader was wrapping the goods, another man entered the post. He was a freight driver, by the look of him. Grizzled and loud, he stomped dust from his boots and nodded at Wyatt, who gave a curt nod in return. The freight driver went to the counter and slapped it. "Give me some jerky, Jed, and a bottle." While the trader fetched the whiskey, the freight driver turned and idly scanned the wall. It was covered in notices, bills for livestock, bounty posters for outlaws, and a single, newer-looking flyer. Clara, from the trees, watched the door. She was too far to see inside, but she could hear the muffled voices. She shifted, her anxiety growing. Inside, the freight driver squinted at the new flyer. "Well, I'll be," he muttered, $1,000. Just for a girl. Wyatt, gathering his supplies, went still. "What's that?" the trader, Jed, asked. "This here," the driver said, tapping the paper. "Says a Malcolm Kane, down in Kansas, is looking for his new wife. Says she ran off on her wedding day, suffering from a fit of nerves and female delusion. $1,000 for her safe return. No questions asked." He squinted at the sketch on the paper. "Pretty little thing. Looks like a scared rabbit." Wyatt did not turn. He paid for his goods, his movements measured. $1,000, the trader mused. "That's a heap of money for a runaway?" "That's what I'm saying," the driver said. He took his bottle, turned, and his eyes fell on Wyatt. He looked at Wyatt's profile, at the duster, at the quiet way he held himself. Then his gaze drifted past him, out the open door, toward the trees where the horses were hidden. The driver had seen Wyatt ride in. He had not seen him ride in alone. Wyatt saw the man's eyes narrow. He saw the flicker of calculation. The man looked from Wyatt to the trees, and then back to the flyer on the wall. Wyatt's hand was already on the door. He did not run. He walked, but he walked fast. He was halfway to the trees when the freight driver appeared on the porch of the trading post. The man just stood there, watching him, his hand on the bottle in his pocket. He was thinking. Clara saw Wyatt coming. She saw the look on his face. It was a mask, hard and tight. "What is it?" she asked. Wyatt did not answer. He shoved the supplies into his saddlebag. "Get on the mule!" "Wyatt, what?" "Now, Clara!" His voice was a whip crack. She had never heard him raise it. She scrambled onto the mule, her hands shaking. The freight driver on the porch had been joined by the trader. They were both watching. Wyatt swung into his saddle. He grabbed the mule's lead rope, and he did not hesitate. He kicked the buckskin into a gallop, pulling the mule along behind him. They fled back into the hills, back into the desert. They rode hard for hours, pushing the animals, leaving the trail and cutting through a rocky, treacherous canyon. They did not stop until the horse was lathered and blowing, and the sun was a bleeding red smear in the west. They took shelter in a deep ravine, a scar in the earth hidden by boulders. Wyatt tended to the animals, his movements short and angry. Clara slid off the mule, her legs trembling so hard she could barely stand. The terror of the flight, the sharp, sudden panic in Wyatt's voice. The look on his face, it had all come crashing down. The fear broke something inside her, the last thin barrier of her composure. "He knows," she whispered. "That man, he knew. He saw the flyer." Wyatt was rubbing the horse's flank, his back to her. "Yes, a flyer, like for a criminal?" "For a runaway wife," Wyatt said, his voice clipped. $1,000. 1,000. She put her hand to her mouth. She was property. She was livestock. She was a reward. There was no escape. Kane's reach was everywhere. He had poisoned the whole world. She sank to the ground, the rough burlap on her feet catching on the stones, and she began to sob. It was not the choked, terrified crying of her nightmares. It was a deep, racking, hopeless grief, torn from the very center of her. She wept for her father, for her lost home, for the girl she had been. She wept for the terrifying, endless future of running. Wyatt finished with the horse and turned. He saw her, a small, huddled figure, the ruined wedding dress a pale blot in the twilight. She was completely broken. He walked over and crouched in front of her. He did not touch her. Not at first. "Clara!" She sobbed into his chest, her hands clutching the front of his duster. She hid her face against him, muffling the sound. He was the only solid thing in a world that was trying to tear her apart. He let her cry. His hand came up, slowly, and rested on the back of her head, his fingers tangling in her matted hair. He just held her. "He will find me," she choked out against his shirt. "He will find me, and he will drag me back. I am his. The law says I am his." Wyatt's hand tightened, holding her steady. He pressed his cheek against the top of her head, his voice a low, rough whisper in her ear. "You're not his." It was a simple declaration, a truth he had decided. She pulled back, just enough to look at him, her face streaked with tears and dirt. "But I ain't yours either." It was a raw, desperate assertion. She was not a thing to be passed from one man to another. She was herself, even if that self was shattered. Wyatt looked at her, his eyes dark in the twilight. The space between them was electric, charged with her pain and his stillness. "Not yet," he replied. The words hung in the air. Not yet. It was not a threat. It was not a claim of ownership. It was a promise that he would not take. He would not own. That if she ever was his, it would be a choice. And that time was not now. She stared at him, her breath catching, the heat from his body, the rough texture of his coat, the steady gaze of his eyes. It was too much. His head dipped, slowly. He was giving her time to pull away. She did not. Their first kiss was slow and reluctant. It was born of pain and heat. It was not the gentle, sweet kiss of a parlor romance. It was grit and chapped lips, and the salt of her tears. It was the desperate, aching need of two people who had nothing else in the world to hold on to. It started as a simple, hesitant press of mouths, a question. Then, as the contact was made, something deeper took over. The heat. His hand moved from her head to cup her jaw, his thumb brushing the tear track on her cheek. Her hands, which had been fisted in his duster, opened, gripping him. It was a kiss of profound, staggering loneliness, a spark in the cold dark. It was she who pulled away first, breaking the contact with a gasp. She was afraid of the feeling, afraid of him, afraid of herself. The old panic rose. This was how it started. This was the prelude to being owned. But the need for him, for this one good, warm thing, was stronger than the fear. She looked at him, her eyes wide, her lips parted. "Don't stop," she whispered, the words a plea. "I've waited too long." She had waited her whole life to choose, to feel something that was not cold duty or colder fear. She was telling him yes. She leaned in again, but he didn't take her. Not yet. He stopped her, his hand gentle but firm on her shoulder. He heard the desperation in her voice, but he also saw the terror behind it. To take her now, when she was broken and running, would make him no better than Cain. It would be a different kind of theft. He did not kiss her again. Instead, he pulled her close. But this time, it was different. He tucked her head under his chin and just held her, stroking her hair. "We'll get north," he said, his voice rough with an emotion she could not name. It was the sound of his own desire, held firmly in check. "We'll get you safe. Then we'll see." He laid her down on her bedroll and covered her with the wool blanket. He handed her the tin of salve. "See to your feet." He moved back to his own spot, on the other side of the dead fire, and sat with his back against the rock, his rifle across his knees. He would watch the night. Clara lay in the darkness, her body thrumming, her lips still tingling from the kiss. She was confused and aching and terrified. And for the first time in her life, she felt entirely, inexplicably safe. The freight driver and the trader were lost in the dust behind them, but their presence remained. The world was no longer empty. It had eyes, and those eyes were worth $1,000. Wyatt pushed them north, deeper into the foothills, climbing toward the granite spine of the mountains. He avoided trails, cutting through dense pine and shadow, following game tracks that a posse would never find. The air grew thin and cold. The buckskin horse, pushed hard and now lame from a loose rock in the canyon, began to falter. The animal was favoring its front left, a small limp that was getting worse with every mile. Clara saw it. She saw the way Wyatt's jaw tightened every time the horse stumbled. He had saved her, but his horse, his only real possession, was paying the price. 2 days after the trading post, the sky, which had been a harsh, indifferent blue, turned the color of a fresh bruise. A thick, gray ceiling dropped, snagging on the mountaintops. The wind, which had been a whisper, began to howl. Then the snow began. It was not a gentle, drifting snow. It was an early, angry storm, with small, hard pellets that stung their faces and hissed in the pines. It came down with a sudden, suffocating thickness. "We have to find shelter," Wyatt shouted over the wind. He was off his horse, leading the limping animal. Clara was huddled on the mule, the wool blanket wrapped around her, but the cold was slicing right through it. "Where?" she cried, her voice snatched away by the gale. "There," he pointed, not at a structure, but at a dense tangle of brush and ancient, wind-twisted juniper growing at the base of a sheer rock face. "Old Shepherd's Camp, I've heard of 'em." He hacked a path through the frozen brush with his knife, pulling the animals in after him. Behind the thicket, hidden from the world, was a dark opening in the rock. It was not a grand cavern, just a deep, dry cave, hollowed out by wind and time. It was high enough to stand in, and deep enough to blunt the screaming wind. It was a refuge. He settled the animals in the back, where they were sheltered. He used the last of his energy to gather wood from under the overhangs, and soon he had a small, smoky fire crackling just inside the cave's mouth. The smoke curled up the rock face and was instantly shredded by the snow. No one would see it. They were safe, for now. They were trapped by the storm, but they were hidden by it, too. For a full day, they did nothing but huddle by the fire. The world beyond the cave mouth was a swirling, white chaos. The isolation was absolute. It was just the two of them, the two animals, and the sound of the fire. On the second morning, the storm broke. The snow stopped, leaving the world muffled, bright, and dangerously cold. They were snowed in. Clara woke from a shivering sleep. Wyatt was already up, feeding the last of the oats to the mule. He had saved nothing for the horse, whose leg was now visibly swollen. She looked at her own clothes. The wedding dress was frozen stiff, caked with mud and ice. It was a filthy, grotesque shell. She had been wearing it for she had lost track of the days. It was the skin of a life she had to shed. "Wyatt," she said, her voice quiet. He turned. I need to take this off." He looked at the dress, then at her. He nodded, his face unreadable. He turned his back to her, giving her the privacy of his respect. Her fingers were numb, clumsy with the cold. The few remaining buttons were frozen in their holes. She had to fight the fabric. It tore with a sound like a dry scream. She ripped it, clawed at it, desperate to be free. She stepped out of the rags. The ruined silk and lace pooled at her feet on the cave floor, a filthy, crumpled skin. She stood in what was left of her underthings, a thin chemise and drawers, torn and travel-stained, and she was cold. so very cold. Wyatt, his back still to her, spoke. "The blanket, wrap up." She did, pulling the thick wool around her bare shoulders. But as she did, he saw. He had not meant to look, but he had turned slightly. He saw her back. He saw the bruises. They were old, faded to a sickening yellow-green. But they were there, a constellation of them, across her shoulders, her ribs. One, in the distinct, cruel shape of a man's grip, was high on her arm. It was the proof of her story, the lingering touch of Malcolm Cain. Wyatt's hands clenched into fists at his sides. He said nothing. He just turned, his face a mask of stone, and stalked to the fire. He picked up the coffee pot. "I'll get water," he said, his voice a low growl. "To heat." He was gone for a long time. When he returned, he was carrying the small canvas bucket, full of snow. He set it near the fire to melt. He took the small tin of salve and the clean linen he had bought at the post and set them on a rock. When the water was warm, not hot, he poured some into a small pan. He dipped his rag in it. He turned to her. She was sitting on the bedroll, the blanket clutched to her chest. "The cuts," he said, his voice softer now. "They need cleaning. And the rest?" She did not move. She was terrified. To be this vulnerable, it was what Cain had wanted. Wyatt knelt in front of her. He did not look at her with hunger or with pity. His eyes, in the flickering light of the cave, were just soft, filled with a deep, aching tenderness that was more disarming than any strength. "Clara," he said, just her name. Slowly, she let the blanket fall from one shoulder. He saw the bruise on her arm. His breath hitched. He started there. His hands, which were so rough and calloused, were impossibly gentle. He washed the dirt from her skin. His hands were shaking. He was not shaking from the cold. He was shaking with a contained, profound rage, a rage for the man who had done this, and he was shaking with the sheer, terrifying intimacy of what he was doing. He washed her arms, her back, her shoulders. He kept his eyes on the rag, on the skin, on the wounds, but not on her. He was tending to her, not taking from her. He cleaned the last of the grit from the cuts on her feet, his touch as light as a breath. When he was done, he put the rag down. He picked up the small tin of salve. He looked at her, and this time, his eyes met hers. He was asking permission. She gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. He applied the salve to the cuts, his fingers barely brushing her skin, and then he did something else. He put a small amount of the salve on his fingertips, and with a touch so gentle it was barely there, he brushed it over the worst of the bruises. It was not medicine. It was an anointing. It was an apology. It was an acknowledgement of her pain. A single tear traced a path through the grime on her cheek. He finished. He stood and wrapped the wool blanket back around her, pulling it tight, tucking it under her chin as if she were a child. He sat back on his own heels. The air in the cave was thick with unspoken words. The fire crackled. The wounded horse stamped its foot. She looked at him, her eyes clear. "Thank you." He just nodded, his throat too tight to speak. He left the tattered wedding dress where it lay, but Clara, after a moment, reached for one piece of it, the veil. She pulled it from the pile of rags, the netting snagging on the rock. She folded it, a small square of filthy white, and kept it. They ate a small meal of bacon and hardtack, the silence profound. The storm was over, but they were still in their own world. That night, she did not move to her own side of the fire. She stayed on her bedroll. He laid his own blanket down a few feet away. In the middle of the night, she woke. The fire was low, just glowing embers. The cave was filled with shadows. She was shivering. "Why, Tat?" she whispered. "I'm here." His voice came from the darkness. He was not asleep. "I'm cold." He was silent for a beat. Then, the sound of him moving. He came to her. and slid under the wool blanket, bringing his own with him, layering them. He lay on his back, stiff as a board, not touching her, but the heat from his body was a furnace. She turned on her side, facing him. "You're not," she whispered. "Not what?" "You're not like him." He turned his head on the saddle he used as a pillow. In the faint red glow of the embers, he could just make out the line of her face. "No, ma'am, I'm not." She moved, just a few inches, until her forehead rested against his shoulder. He did not move, but his breathing changed. She felt his hand find hers, under the blankets, the same simple, warm touch as before, but this time it was not enough. She intertwined her fingers with his. She pressed closer. He turned, shifting onto his side to face her. His other hand came up, tracing the line of her jaw, his thumb brushing her bottom lip. It was the same touch he had used with the salve. He kissed her. It was not the desperate, tear-stained kiss of the ravine. This was slow. It was deliberate. It was a question and a statement. It was a discovery. She kissed him back, a deep, hungry sigh escaping her. This was her choice. This was her moment. He pulled back, his eyes searching hers in the dark. "Clara," he whispered, a warning, a final chance to say no. She answered by pulling his face back to hers. They made love on the rough wool blanket, on the floor of a shepherd's cave, while the world outside was frozen white. It was not a fast, frantic act. It was a slow, quiet claiming. It was an unwinding of all the fear and pain and loneliness. His hands, which had been so gentle, were now firm and sure, and worshipped her. He moved with a reverence that undid her. She had kept the veil by her pillow. As they moved, it was brushed aside. It fell, snagging on a piece of rock, hanging between them and the mouth of the cave. It was no longer a shroud. It was a curtain, a thin white barrier between them and everything else. Afterward, they lay tangled together, the blankets pulled over them, their breathing slowly returning to normal. The silence was absolute. Clara was the first to speak, her voice a rough whisper against his chest. "Wyatt? When I thought he had me, I knew who I was. I was the girl who was trapped. And when I was running, I knew who I was. I was the girl who was running." She paused, her hand tracing a scar on his ribs. "Now I don't know who I am. I don't know who I am without him hunting me." He was quiet for a long time. He held her tighter. His lips brushed the top of her hair. "Then we don't let him find you," he replied. "You'll be the woman who got away. You'll be just Clara." He said it simply, as if it were the only possible truth. But as he lay there in the dark, holding her, he knew the hollow ring of his own words. He knew men like Cain, rich, connected. He would not stop. $1,000 was just the start. Cain was not hunting a runaway bride. He was hunting a piece of property that had defied him. It was about his pride, and that was more dangerous than money. He looked past her, toward the mouth of the cave. The snow was a bright, cruel white under the moonlight, and he thought of his horse. The buckskin's leg was bad. They could not ride him. They would be slow, a man on a mule and a man on foot. They were easy to track. Clara must have felt the shift in him, the new tension. "The horse," she said. "He's not getting better, is he?" Wyatt did not lie. "No, he's not." "We'll be slow. We'll be slow," he agreed. She pulled away, sitting up, the blanket pooling around her waist. Her bare shoulders glowed in the cold light. "You should go. Leave me." He stared at her. "What?" "You can move faster on the mule. You can get away. They're not hunting you. Wyatt, they're hunting me. I'm the one who's bringing this death to you. You saved me. That's more than anyone has ever done. Now go, please." He looked at her, at this small, fierce woman, offering him an escape, offering to sacrifice herself so he could be free. He stood up from the blanket, pulling his pants on, his movements angry. "You think that's what this is?" he said, his voice low. "You think I'm just dropping you off at the next stop?" I'm a reward," she stammered. $1,000. I'm putting you in danger." He grabbed his shirt and pulled it on. He turned to face her, his eyes blazing. "You listen to me. I've been running my whole life. From bad jobs, bad men, bad memories. I have left too many behind." His voice broke. Just for a second, on that one word, too many. He was not just seeing her. He was seeing someone else, a face, a memory, a failure. "I left my brother in a border town saloon 'cause I didn't want his trouble. He was dead 2 days later." The confession hung in the air, cold and sharp. "I am not," he said, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "Leaving you? I don't care if Cain has the whole damn army with him. I am not leaving you. We go together, or we don't go." He stood there, a hard, scarred man, his whole past laid bare in that one raw refusal. Clara just stared at him, and she believed him. They left the buckskin horse in the cave. It was the hardest thing Wyatt had ever done. He left it with a pile of dry grass and a full bucket of water. It was a good horse. It felt like another betrayal. They traveled on foot, with Clara riding the mule, through the melting, slushy snow. It was slow, agonizing work, but they were together. They reached a small, wind-blasted town on the edge of the railroad line. It was not a real town, just a collection of saloons, cheap hotels, and a land office, all catering to the men building the tracks. "We need to get off the ground," Wyatt said, his gaze scanning the street. "We need to get on that train." "We have no money," Clara said. "I'll get some." He told her to wait in the alley by the livery. The first thing she did was find a bucket of water and a bar of lye soap. She scrubbed her face and hands. Then she took Wyatt's skinning knife. Her hair, matted and filthy, hung to her waist. It was the hair of the bride. She grabbed a handful and sawed it off. She cut it short, raggedly, just below her ears. It was clumsy and uneven, but it was gone. When she was done, the woman in the warped reflection of the window was a stranger, sharp-cheeked, wide-eyed, and shorn. She was no one. She was perfect. Wyatt returned an hour later. He was empty-handed. Not just empty-handed. He was carrying his bedroll and his rifle, but not his saddle. Clara looked at him, then at the mule. "Wyatt, your saddle." "Sold it," he said, his voice flat. He walked past her. She grabbed his arm. That was your gear." "It was just leather," he said. But she knew it was not. She had seen the tooling on it. It was old, fine work. It was not the saddle of a simple cowhand. It was something more. It was the saddle that had belonged to his dead brother. He had sold the last piece of his past to buy their future. He did not tell her. He just pushed 2 small, crumpled paper tickets into her hand. "Freight line," he said. "It's not a passenger train. It's rough, but it's leaving in 10 minutes. It crosses the line. Gets us to Colorado." "Colorado?" "You said you had family." He said, "You said you had a cousin." She had told him, in the cave, about her late mother's cousin, a woman who had run off with a miner years ago, settled in a booming camp called Leadville. "Leadville," she said, the name a strange, hopeful sound. "Yes, Leadville." "Then let's go." The train depot was a scene of chaos. Men shouted, steam hissed, and the massive freight engine idled like a breathing monster. They moved through the crowd, Wyatt in front, Clara behind him, her head down, her short hair hidden by an old cap he'd bought. They were almost at the open door of a boxcar. Hope was a physical, aching thing in her chest. They were going to make it. "Clara." The voice was not Wyatt's. It was cold and polite, and it cut through the noise of the station like a razor. Clara froze. She knew that voice. She turned. A man stood not 10 feet away. He was tall, dressed in a clean black suit and a bowler hat. He was smiling, a thin, unpleasant smile. He was not Malcolm Kane. He was worse. He was the man Kane trusted. "Deputy Harlan," she breathed. "Miss Clara," Harlan said, his smile widening. He tipped his hat. "Mr. Kane has been worried sick. You've led us on a terrible chase." His eyes flicked to Wyatt, dismissing him as nothing. "Now, you come along. We'll have you home before you know it." He reached for her arm. Wyatt moved. He did not speak. He did not hesitate. He moved his body between Clara and Harlan. Harlan's smile faded. "Step aside, Cowboy. This is legal business." "This ain't your business," Wyatt said, his voice low and deadly. "She's his wife." "She's nothing to him." Wyatt cut in. Harlan's hand dropped to the pistol at his hip. "I'm not asking again." "Don't have to," Wyatt said. Wyatt drew first. It was not like the stories. It was a blur of motion, a deafening, violent explosion. Wyatt's gun was out, barking fire before Harlan's had even cleared his holster. 1, 2. The bullets hit Harlan in the chest, punching him backward. The look on his face was not anger. It was just surprise. He fell, his own gun clattering on the wooden platform. The station erupted in screams. Wyatt grabbed Clara's arm. "Go, now!" He shoved her toward the boxcar, but as he turned, he grunted, a sharp, sudden sound. He stumbled. "Wyatt." He had drawn first, but Harlan, in his dying spasm, had pulled the trigger. A red stain was spreading across Wyatt's ribs, dark on his canvas coat. The train whistle screamed. The boxcar door began to slide shut. The train was moving. "I'm hit," Wyatt said, his voice tight with pain. Clara did not think. She was not the girl who ran. She was not the girl who was hunted. She was the woman who stayed. She grabbed the front of his coat, her short hair flying. She put her shoulder into him, using all her weight. "You are not leaving me!" she screamed. She pulled him, half lifting, half dragging him. The train was picking up speed. The gap between the car and the platform was widening. With a final, desperate heave, she pulled Wyatt into the darkness of the boxcar just as the door slammed shut, plunging them into the rumbling, swaying blackness. They had escaped. The boxcar was black and loud. The world was a screaming metallic rhythm, the clack, 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 clack of the wheels on the track, a frantic heartbeat pulling them into the dark. They had fallen onto a bed of old, sour straw, the air thick with the smell of dust and old manure. Clara scrambled to her knees, her hands feeling for him. "Wyatt?" He was slumped against the wall, his breathing fast and shallow. "I'm here." "You're hit," she said, her voice frantic. I saw you." "It's a graze," he lied, his voice tight with the pain he was trying to hide. "Let me see." She fumbled in the darkness. Her hands found his side, and he could not suppress a sharp, guttural groan. Her fingers came away wet and hot. "It is not a graze," she said, her voice flat with a new, cold terror. "This was worse than running. This was him dying." She found the small tin matchbox in his duster pocket. Her fingers were shaking so badly she dropped it. She found it again, fumbled a match free, and struck it against the wall. The small, flickering flame illuminated a nightmare. The canvas of his coat was soaked. The bullet had torn a ragged, bloody path high on his ribs, a deep furrow in the muscle. It was bleeding badly. "I need—" She looked around. Nothing. Straw. Dirt. "I need a bandage." She had nothing. The clean linen he had bought was in his saddlebag. But it was not enough. Not for this. She plunged her hand into the pocket of the man's trousers she wore. Her fingers brushed against a small, folded square of netting. The veil. She pulled it out. The filthy, tattered piece of her old life. It was stained with mud and sweat. It was a mockery, and it was all she had. "Hold this," she commanded, striking another match. She tore a long, thick strip from the veil with her teeth and her hands. She balled it up. "This will hurt," she whispered. "Just do it." She pressed the wadded lace and netting directly into the wound. He arched off the floor of the car, his body rigid. A strangled, tearing sound ripped from his throat, but he did not cry out. He just bore it. "Hold it," she said, her voice breaking. "Hold it there." She tore another strip, and another. With the match burning down to her fingers, she bound the makeshift bandage around his chest, tying it tight. The dirty white lace was stark against the spreading, dark red. It was a horrible, grotesque bandage, but it held. He slumped back, his head hitting the wooden wall with a thud. He was pale, his skin clammy in the flickering light of the last match. "Good job, Clara," he whispered, and then his eyes closed. The train rumbled on for hours. Clara sat in the dark, holding his hand, feeling the weak, thready pulse. Every jolt of the car sent a fresh wave of agony through him. He was burning with fever, and she was freezing with fear. They were not alone. From the far corner of the boxcar, a voice spoke, calm and measured. "The Lord provides, child, but I fear that wound needs a bit more than lace and hope." Clara gasped. Scrambling back, pulling Wyatt's pistol from his holster, she aimed it at the sound of the voice. "Who's there? Show yourself!" A match flared, not hers. It illuminated the face of an older man, thin as a rail, with kind, tired eyes and a threadbare black coat. He held his empty hands up. "Peace, child. I am just a traveler, a man of God, though God has seen fit to make my passage humble." He looked at Wyatt, his face full of a sad, practiced knowledge. "He is hurt badly." "He's a good man," Clara said, her voice defensive, the gun still shaking. "I'm not a judge. Miss, my name is Gideon. I am a preacher of a fashion, and I have seen more gunshot wounds than I have saved souls. I'm afraid." He gestured to a small, worn black bag at his feet. "I have some carbolic and a needle." Clara hesitated. The man's face was open. There was no guile in it. She lowered the gun. Reverend Gideon moved toward them, striking another match and lighting a small, stubby candle. In the dim, steady light, he examined Wyatt. "You were right to bind it," he said. "You kept him from bleeding out. Now, this will be unpleasant." He opened his bag. He had clean linen, a bottle of dark liquid, and a curved suture needle. "He'll need to bite on something." Clara unbuckled the leather belt from her own trousers and folded it. Wyatt, his eyes barely open, understood. He took it between his teeth. "Hold his hand," Gideon said, "and do not look away, child. He needs to know you are here." She knelt, taking Wyatt's free hand in both of hers. The preacher poured the carbolic acid directly into the wound. Wyatt's entire body went rigid. A silent, terrible scream trapped behind his teeth. His fingers crushed hers, but she did not pull away. She did not look away. She watched Gideon's hands as they worked, quickly, efficiently, cleaning the torn flesh. "It's a bad tear," Gideon murmured, threading the needle. "Tore the muscle clean, but it missed the lung. He is a very lucky man, or a blessed one." He began to stitch. With every pass of the needle, Wyatt's body flinched. Clara's tears streamed down her face, but she said nothing. She just held on, her knuckles white. When it was done, Gideon bandaged the wound properly. Wyatt was slick with sweat, his jaw locked, but he was alive. The preacher sat back on his heels, a deep sigh. He asked no questions. He did not ask how the wound happened, or why they had jumped a freight train, or why her hair was shorn like a boy's. He just saw them. He saw the way her hand never left Wyatt's. He saw the fierce, protective terror in her eyes. He saw the way Wyatt, even in his agony, would open his eyes just to find her, to make sure she was still there. "You are running," Gideon said. It was not a question. "Where to?" "Leadville," Clara whispered. I have family there." Gideon's face clouded. Leadville, 10,000 feet closer to God, and 10,000 miles from His grace. A hard town, child, full of hope and full of fresh graves. He reached into his bag and pulled out a small, dark blue bottle. Laudanum, for the fever. It will come. A few drops in water, no more. The train screeched, the grinding of metal on metal. It was slowing. "This is the end of the line," Gideon said. He helped Clara get Wyatt to his feet. Wyatt was a dead weight, barely conscious. The preacher helped them out of the boxcar and onto the platform, into the thin, painfully cold air. "God be with you, children," he said, pressing the bottle of laudanum into her hand. "You will surely need him." Leadville was not a town. It was a chaotic wound gashed into the side of the mountain. The air was so thin it hurt to breathe. The streets were a sea of thick, ankle-deep mud, frozen in some places, liquid in others. The noise was a constant, deafening roar, the hammering of new construction, the shouting of men, the crack of dynamite on the hills, and the tinny, frantic sound of pianos from a dozen saloons. Wyatt was leaning on her, his entire weight. He was already burning, the fever Gideon had promised taking hold. "Where? Clara?" he mumbled, his feet dragging. "Where's your cousin?" She had an address, written on a piece of paper from a letter sent 2 years ago. A Mrs. Agatha Plum. They stumbled through the mud, past rough-looking men in filthy flannel, past painted women on balconies. It was a city of desperate hope. They found the house. It stood apart from the saloons, a 2-story wooden building with a sign that said, "Plum's Rooms for Gentlemen." It was clean. It had glass windows and a painted porch. It was an island of respectability in a sea of vice. Clara's heart leaped. This was it. This was safety. She knocked, her hand trembling. The door opened. A woman stood there, tall and severe, her hair pulled back in a tight, gray-streaked bun. She wore a spotless white apron. She had Clara's mother's eyes. "Yes," the woman's voice was sharp. "Cousin Agatha," Clara whispered. The woman's eyes narrowed. She looked at Clara's shorn hair, the filthy men's clothes. "Good heavens! Who are you?" "It's me, Clara. Clara Monroe." Agatha's hand flew to her mouth. "Clara, child, what has happened to you? We heard you." "Please, Cousin Agatha," Clara sobbed, the relief washing over her in a wave. "Please, we need help. This is Wyatt. He's hurt. He saved my life." Agatha's gaze moved from Clara to the man slumped against the doorframe, pale, blood showing through his new bandage, a gun at his hip. Her face, which had been shocked, turned to ice. "We," she repeated, the word a cold stone. "He saved me," Clara pleaded. From Mr. Kane. We are together. We just need a room, just for a few days, until he is strong. I can pay. I can work for you. I'll do anything." "You ran," Agatha said, her voice flat. "From your wedding, from a good, wealthy man. The scandal had shamed your father's memory." "You don't understand," Clara cried. It was not a marriage. It was a prison. He was a monster." "I know what Malcolm Kane is." "Clara," Agatha said, her voice like a slap. "And I know what a girl who runs from a scandal is. I have a respectable house here. I built it from nothing, with my own hands. I will not have this brought to my door." She gestured at Wyatt, at the blood, at Clara's ruined appearance. "He's sick. Cousin," Clara begged, tears streaming down her face. "He will die in the street." "Men like him die in these streets every day," Agatha said, her voice cold and final. "You made your choice when you ran. You followed one scandal with another. You'll bring death to my door. I will not have it." "Agatha, please, for my mother's sake." "Your mother is dead, and she would be shamed to see you." She stepped back. Go to the saloons, down on State Street. That is where women like you belong now." She closed the door. Clara heard the distinct, metallic click of the lock. She stood there, frozen. The last door in the world, the very last hope, had just been shut and bolted. The cold was seeping in. Night was falling fast. And in the high mountains, the temperature plummeted. Wyatt was shaking violently, the fever taking full hold. "Wyatt," she said, her voice numb, "we have to go." He was barely conscious. She was dragging him now, his boots sucking in the mud. The town, which had seemed so full of life, was now a hostile, leering monster. Men jeered at her from the saloon doors. Women in fine dresses pulled their skirts away as she passed. She was desperate. She found an alley, dark and filled with barrels. Behind the largest saloon, the Gilded Cage, was a livery barn. It smelled of sour beer, wet hay, and horses. It was shelter. She half carried, half dragged Wyatt into the dark, cavernous barn. She found an empty stall, one filled with clean, dry straw. She pulled him in, covering him, burying him in the straw to hold in the heat. The fever was a storm. For 3 days, Wyatt was not there. He was somewhere else, a dark, burning place. He trembled and sweated, the straw around him growing damp. He cried out, his voice hoarse. Names. "Harlan, damn you, no left him, Jacob." Clara did not leave his side. She sat in the filthy straw, her arms wrapped around her knees, and watched him. She tended him every hour. She melted snow from the roof in a rusty bucket to give him water. She used the last of the preacher's linen to bathe his face. She fed him the precious drops of laudanum until the bottle was empty. He was dying. She was starving. The medicine was gone. He needed quinine. He needed a doctor. He needed food. She had nothing in the world. She looked at her hands, raw and filthy. On her left hand, glinting in the sliver of light from the barn door, was a band of gold. The ring, Cain's ring. He had forced it onto her finger before the ceremony, a mark of his ownership, a heavy, ugly band with a small, cold diamond. She had forgotten it was there. It was a shackle. She tried to pull it off. Her fingers were swollen from the cold and the work. It would not budge. She cried out in frustration, a small, animal sound. She ran to the horse trough, plunging her hand into the icy water, grabbing the bar of lye soap. She scrubbed, twisting the ring, the skin tearing. It came off. She held it in her palm. It was the price of her life. It was the last piece of her past. She ran from the barn. She found the pawn shop. A greedy-eyed man behind a cage sneered at her shorn hair and rags. "Where'd a girl like you get a ring like this, huh?" "It was my mother's," she lied, her voice hard. "Likely story." He tossed 2 $5 gold coins on the counter. $10. It was worth 100. Fine. She snatched the money. She ran. She found the assayer's office, where a sign advertised doctoring. She bought quinine powder. With the last of the money, she went to the kitchen door of the Gilded Cage and bought a pail of hot, greasy broth. She ran back to the barn. She forced the bitter quinine and water down Wyatt's throat. She spooned the hot broth between his lips. She sat in the straw, her own stomach a tight, aching knot of hunger. She had spent every cent on him. She put her cold hand inside her blouse. Her fingers touched the small, folded square of netting, the veil. She had kept it. She had pawned Cain's ring, but she had kept her veil. It was not a symbol of marriage. It was a symbol of her escape. It was a secret hope. She held it, and she prayed. That night, the shaking stopped. Wyatt lay still. Clara, terrified, put her hand on his chest. His breathing was not a ragged gasp. It was slow and deep. His skin was not burning. It was cool. The fever had broken. He opened his eyes. They were no longer cloudy. They were his. He saw her. "Clara?" His voice was a dry croak. She collapsed onto his chest, weeping, her shoulders shaking. I'm here, Wyatt, I'm right here." He was too weak to lift his arms, but his hand found her shorn hair, his fingers tangling in it. "Knew you would be," he whispered, and fell back asleep. Wyatt recovered, but it was slow. He was weak, a shadow of the man who had pulled her from the dust. They needed money. They needed food. Clara went back to the kitchen door of the gilded cage. A large woman with a hard face and dyed red hair was dumping potato peels. "Get out of here," the woman said. "I need work," Clara said, her voice steady. The woman, May, the owner, looked her up and down. The shorn hair, the men's trousers, the desperate, proud set of her jaw. "You ain't got the look for the front tables, honey." "The kitchen," Clara said. "I can wash. I can scrub floors. I can peel potatoes. Anything. I'm a hard worker." May sized her up. $1 a day, one meal. You start now." It was brutal. Back-breaking work. 12, sometimes 14 hours a day. In a hot, steamy kitchen. Her hands, which had been soft, were now cracked and bleeding, scalded from the water, raw from the lye soap. She scrubbed pots thick with grease, mopped up floors slick with spilled beer and sick. The other women in the kitchen, the saloon girls who came back to smoke and rest their feet, were merciless. They saw her, this strange, quiet girl with the educated voice and the boy's hair. "What's your story?" one of them asked, blowing smoke. "Look at her," another sneered. "Ran from a man, I bet, or a husband. A runaway bride, still in her rags." The first one laughed. The name stuck. They mocked her relentlessly. "Hey, bride, scrub that pot. Mind your feet. Bride, don't want to get your pretty wedding dress dirty." Clara said nothing. She kept her head down. She scrubbed. She took the mockery. She took her one meal and her $1. And every night, she took a pail of leftover stew back to Wyatt in the barn. He was getting stronger. He was walking. He hated it. He hated her working for him, her hands red and raw. "I can work, Clara," he said, his voice raw with shame. "No," she said, dressing his wound, which was finally healing. "You heal. It's my turn. You saved me. Now I'm saving you." A week passed. Wyatt was on his feet. He had found small work, mucking stalls in the very livery they were hiding in. It was not much, but it was a start. Clara was walking from the saloon, her shift over, the small pail of stew in her hand. The sun was setting, painting the muddy street a brilliant, bloody orange. She saw them, a group of riders, coming up the main street. They were not miners. They were not freight drivers. They were dressed in expensive dusters, on fine, fresh horses. They looked clean. And at their head, a man sat his horse like a king. Malcolm Kane. He was exactly as she remembered. Older, with a perfectly trimmed silver-gray beard, a fine black coat, and eyes as cold and dead as chips of slate. Clara's heart stopped. The world tilted. The thin mountain air refused to enter her lungs. She dropped the pail, the stew spilling into the mud. He was not here for love. He was not here for a wedding. He was here for vengeance. He rode straight to the sheriff's office. He dismounted, not even looking at the town around him. He spoke to the sheriff, who came running out, hat in hand. Kane flashed papers. He flashed money, and the sheriff nodded, his face a mask of sudden, eager service. Clara turned and fled back into the alley. She nearly fainted. She ran, stumbling, to the barn. "Wyatt, he's here! Kane is here!" She was frantic, pulling at his arm. We have to go. We have to run. Now. Out the back. Into the mountains. Wyatt was strapping his gun belt on. He had spent the $1 she gave him on bullets, cleaning his pistol until it shone. He grabbed her wrist. His grip was iron. "Clara, look at me." She stopped, gasping, her eyes wide and blind with terror. "We ran," he said, his voice low and steady. "We ran from the plains. We ran from the trading post. We ran from Harlan. Look where it got us. Sick, broke, hiding in straw. There's nowhere left to run. Clara." He put his other hand on her cheek, his calloused thumb brushing her shorn hair. "We don't run anymore." What do we do?" she whispered. "He has the law. He has money. He has everyone." "He doesn't have us," Wyatt said. "First we see the preacher." "What?" "The preacher, Gideon. I saw him on the street yesterday. He's set up a mission tent at the edge of camp." He pulled her out of the barn. He did not run. He walked her straight down the main street, past the sheriff's office, past Kane's hired men. They found the canvas tent. Reverend Gideon was inside, reading his Bible by the light of a single lantern. He looked up as they entered. A slow, sad smile touched his face. Mr. Wyatt, Miss Clara, I had a feeling our business was not yet concluded." "Reverend," Wyatt said, his voice formal. He took off his hat. "We need a marriage." Clara stared at him, her heart stopping for a different reason. Gideon raised an eyebrow. "A marriage? In haste? The good book warns against—" "A man is in this town." Wyatt cut in, his voice hard. "His name is Malcolm Kane. He claims she's his wife. She is not. He's rich. He has papers. He has the law. I want to give her my name. I want to give her the protection of my law." Reverend Gideon looked at Clara, his gaze deep and searching. "And you, child, is this your wish, to bind yourself to this man, to his trouble?" Clara looked at Wyatt. He was not looking at her. He was staring at the canvas wall. His jaw set. He was offering her his name, his life, his protection. He was standing between her and Kane. It was the most profound, selfless act she had ever known. "Yes," she said. Then she looked at Wyatt, finding her own strength. "But only if I can keep mine. Too, I am not just yours. I am not trading one owner for another. I am Clara Monroe." Wyatt's hard face softened, the corners of his mouth twitching. It was the barest hint of a smile, but it lit his eyes. "Clara Monroe," he said. "I like the sound of it." He looked at the preacher. "Clara Monroe. And Wyatt. Just Wyatt." Gideon nodded. "The law of man requires a full name, but the law of God only requires a full heart. So be it." They stood in the dusty tent, the roar of the town a distant sea. They had no rings. They had no fine clothes. They had nothing but the wounds they shared. Gideon read the words. They were simple, strong words, not of honoring and obeying, but of partnership and shelter and standing fast. When he said, "You may kiss the bride," Wyatt turned to her. He did not kiss her with the passion from the cave. He kissed her with a deep, solemn reverence. It was not a kiss. It was a vow. It was a promise of the fight to come. They walked out of the tent. They were married. "Now what?" Clara asked, the terror returning. "Now you go to your work," Wyatt said. "The saloon. Why?" "Because that's where he'll be," Wyatt said, his voice cold. "A man like Kane, he'll go to the biggest saloon. He'll buy drinks for the house. He'll tell his story. He'll make the whole town his personal posse." They walked to the gilded cage. The pianos were already playing. The saloon was full. Wyatt pulled May, the owner, aside. He pressed the last of his earnings into her hand. "My wife Clara. She's in trouble. A man is here. His name is Kane. He means to harm her." May looked at Wyatt, then at Clara. She saw the shotgun wedding. She saw the fear in Clara's eyes, and the steel underneath it. May was a hard woman, but she had been a runaway herself. long ago. "The kitchen," May said. "Both of you, stay back there." But Clara shook her head. "No, I'm not hiding in the kitchen. I'm not hiding anywhere." She walked, her head high, behind the long, polished mahogany bar. May looked at her, surprised. "The runaway bride is done running," Clara said, her voice shaking but clear. May nodded, a slow, grim smile. "Under the bar, girl, by the ale pump. There's a scattergun. It's loaded, double-aught." Clara reached down, her hand, raw and chapped, closed around the cold wood and steel of a double-barreled shotgun. She brought it up, resting it below the level of the bar top. That night, just as the saloon was at its loudest, the main batwing doors swung open with a crash. The piano music died. The laughter stopped. Malcolm Kane stood in the doorway, flanked by the town sheriff and two of his own hired men. He scanned the room, his cold eyes searching, expecting to find his property cowering in a corner. Clara stood up from behind the bar. She was not cowering. She was not crying. She was holding the shotgun, the twin black barrels aimed steady, right at his heart. The piano chord died in a sour, hanging jangle. The laughter, the shouts, the clink of glasses, it all evaporated, sucked into a vacuum of disbelief. The saloon, which a moment before had been a roar of frantic life, was suddenly as quiet as a tomb. Every eye in the gilded cage was on the two figures, the man in the doorway, Malcolm Kane, a specter of wealth and cold, righteous power, and the woman behind the bar, a ghost in her own right, with shorn hair and a man's shirt, holding a shotgun as if it were a part of her. Kane's face, which had been set in a mask of confident authority, registered a flicker of pure, unadulterated shock. He had expected to find her. He had expected her to be cowering, weeping, brought to him by the law like a stray animal. He had not expected this. He had not expected her to be waiting. He had not expected her to be armed. "Clara," he said. His voice was not the kind, worried tone he had used with the sheriff. It was a low, possessive growl, the voice she remembered from the church, the voice that promised a locked room. "Put that fool thing down. You have made a mockery of me, of yourself. This childishness is over." He took a step into the room. The sheriff at his side shifted, his hand on his holster, suddenly unsure of his role. "I am not your wife," Clara said. Her voice did not sound like her own. It was low and rough, and it did not shake. The heavy, balanced weight of the shotgun in her hands was an anchor. It was the first solid thing she had held in her life. "Do not be a fool, girl," Kane sneered, his composure returning. He was performing now, for the crowd of miners and gamblers who were watching, their mouths agape. "You are ill. You are confused. You took vows. You belong to me. Now, you will come home." "I have no home," Clara said, her knuckles white on the gun stock. "You have my home," he corrected, his voice rising in anger. "And you have my ring on your finger. You will walk out of this pigsty with me, and you will sign the deed to that useless patch of dirt your father left you. It is mine. You are mine." Clara's hand, the left one, rested on the bar. It was bare. She had pawned his ring. She had washed his claim off her skin with lye and ice. "You have nothing," she said, and then she reached into the blouse of her shirt. Her fingers, raw and red from the kitchen work, closed on the small, folded square of netting. She pulled it out. It was a pathetic, filthy thing, a tattered grayish-white scrap of lace, stained with blood and mud, and the carbolic acid from the train. It was the shroud she had worn, the armor she had clung to. Kane's eyes widened. He recognized it. It was the symbol of her purity. His. "You want your bride, Mr. Kane?" Clara asked, her voice clear and carrying to every corner of the silent room. "You want your wife? You want the woman you bought?" She held the veil up for a moment, letting the entire town see the ruin of it. Then, with a movement of pure, sharp contempt, she threw the shredded remains of the veil at his feet. It landed in the sawdust and spit on the floor.
"There she is,"
Clara said, her voice breaking, but with rage, not fear. "You married a corpse, Mr. Kane. She died on that road. She died in the dust, and she died in the snow. You can have her. You can bury her." Kane looked down at the filthy scrap of lace at his boot. His face, which had been pale with anger, turned a dark, mottled purple. He had been defied. He had been humiliated, publicly, by her, by a woman. His civility, the thin veneer of the powerful man, vanished. His hand, in a blur of pure reptilian rage, shot to the expensive, pearl-handled revolver at his hip. "You little," he began. He never finished. A single shot exploded in the room, deafening, the concussion of it rattling the glasses on the bar. It was not the twin roar of Clara's shotgun. It came from the crowd. Malcolm Kane cried out, a high, strangled sound, and snatched his hand back as if he had been bitten by a snake. His pistol, the pearl handle shattered, spun from his grasp and clattered to the floor, smoking. The crowd of miners parted. Wyatt stepped out from the shadows. He had not been in the kitchen. He had been standing by the wall, watching, his duster blending in. His own pistol was still level in his hand, a thin wisp of smoke curling from the barrel. His face was cold, still, and his eyes were locked on Kane. "Don't," Wyatt said, his voice a quiet command that filled the entire saloon. "Don't you ever touch a gun near her again." Kane clutched his hand, his fingers bleeding where the bullet had shattered the gun's trigger guard, spraying his hand with shrapnel. You sheriff! Arrest this man! He shot me! Arrest him!" The sheriff, his face slick with sweat, finally snapped into action. He drew his own gun and pointed it, not at Kane, but at Wyatt. "Drop the pistol, cowboy! Now! You're under arrest for assault!" He drew first. A man in the crowd shouted, "I saw it," another yelled. "Kane went for his gun." "Silence," the sheriff bellowed, his authority fragile. "This man is a vagrant. This woman is the wife of Mr. Kane. She's a runaway. It's legal business." "No, Sheriff," a new voice said. It was calm, clear, and carried the weight of something heavier than law. Reverend Gideon stepped through the batwing doors. He must have heard the shot and followed. He walked into the center of the room, his threadbare black coat making him a stark figure between the law and the outlaw. "That is where you are mistaken, Sheriff," Gideon said, his tired eyes resting on Malcolm Kane with a cold disapproval. "This is none of your business. Preacher!" the sheriff snapped. "This is a domestic matter." "It became my business," Gideon said, "when Mr. Kane here tried to claim a holy sacrament that was never completed." Kane, clutching his bleeding hand, stared. What are you talking about? Who are you?" "I am a man of God," Gideon said. "And I was at the depot. Sheriff, I was a passenger on that train. I was the one who tended this man's wound, a wound he received protecting Miss Monroe from your deputy, Harlan, a man who died trying to kidnap a woman who was not his wife." A murmur went through the crowd. "Kidnap?" The word was ugly. "That's a lie!" Kane roared. "She is my wife. The papers are signed." The vows were not. A small, sharp voice said. Clara had not lowered the shotgun. She had kept it trained on Kane's men. "The vows were not spoken," Clara repeated. "I ran before the words, before God." "And that, Sheriff," Gideon said, his voice rising, "makes this a matter of fraud. This man, Malcolm Kane, has used his wealth and his influence to pursue this woman across 2 territories, claiming a marriage that does not exist. He has filed false reports. He has caused the death of one of his own men in the pursuit of this coercion." The sheriff's face went pale. The crowd was turning. They were miners, hard men who distrusted wealth and power. They were on Wyatt's side. That's a civil matter? The sheriff stammered. Is it? Gideon pressed. Is it a civil matter to knowingly pursue a woman under a false claim, to offer a bounty for her, to try and draw a weapon on her in a public saloon? And furthermore, Gideon said, his voice ringing with authority, if you are concerned with the state of Miss Monroe's soul, or her marital status, you are too late. He turned and gestured to Wyatt, and then to Clara. An hour ago, in my own tent, I joined this man, Wyatt, and this woman, Clara Monroe, in holy matrimony, before God, with vows that were spoken, with a full heart. He turned back to the sheriff. So, you see, Sheriff, this is, as you say, a domestic matter. But this man, he pointed at Wyatt, was merely protecting his legal wife. From this man, he pointed at Kane, who is, at best, a fraud, and at worst, a man guilty of coercion, kidnapping, and incitement to violence. The saloon was dead silent. The sheriff looked at Kane. He looked at the angry faces of the miners. He looked at the preacher, and he looked at Clara, who still held the shotgun, her eyes like chips of ice. His political future in this rough town was evaporating. He made his choice. He holstered his pistol. Mr. Kane, he said, his voice suddenly cold and official. I'm afraid I'm going to have to ask you to come with me on charges of fraud and coercion. You what? Kane was apoplectic. You work for me. I will have your badge. Maybe, the sheriff said, his nerve returning. He grabbed Kane by his uninjured arm. But today, you're coming with me. He looked at Kane's two hired men, who had their hands raised. You two as well, material witnesses. This is not over, Kane screamed as the sheriff dragged him toward the door. His eyes found Clara, and the hatred in them was a physical, burning thing. You will never keep that land, girl. You'll never keep anything. The West don't let women win. Do you hear me? It don't let women like you win. He was gone, his voice fading down the muddy street. The saloon was quiet for a beat. Then, someone whistled. May, the owner, walked over and took the shotgun from Clara's hands, which were now shaking violently. Well, bride, May said, a slow, wide grin on her face. You've had a hell of a shift. Wyatt was at her side. He did not touch her. He just stood there, his presence a solid wall. He put his arm around her shaking shoulders. It's done. No, Clara whispered, leaning into him. It's not. He's right. He won't stop. Then we won't stop either. He looked down at her, his face grim but set. Let's go home. They left Leadville the next morning. They did not have much. The mule, the pay Clara had earned, the pay Wyatt had earned mucking stalls. They bought a second mule, some supplies, and turned their backs on the high, cold mountains. They rode south, back the way they had come, but on a different path. The journey was long and quiet. They were no longer running. They were returning. After weeks of travel, they crested a low, dry ridge. The air was warmer here. The land was flat, baked, and empty. This is it, Clara said. They looked out over the land. Her land. It was not a paradise. It was not the green, rolling hills of her memory. It was dry, cracked earth. A fire, years ago, had burned half of it, leaving the blackened, skeletal remains of cottonwood trees along a dry creek bed. The cabin, her childhood home, was a ruin. The roof was gone. One wall collapsed. It was just a pile of gray, salvaged wood. It was parched, it was broken, it was scarred. It was just like them. Clara stared at it, her heart sinking. This was what she had fought for, this desolation. Wyatt dismounted. He walked a few paces onto the land, his boots kicking up puffs of alkali dust. He knelt, his back to her. He dug his scarred fingers into the soil. He sifted the dry, powdery dirt through his hand. He was quiet for a long time, just feeling the land. Clara dismounted and walked to his side. It's all gone," she whispered, the hope finally draining out of her. "There's nothing here." Wyatt let the dust fall from his hand. He looked up, not at her, but at the collapsed cabin, at the vast, empty, bruised purple sky. "It's not gone, Clara," he said, his voice quiet. "It's just sleeping. The wood in that cabin is old, but it's hard. The well is probably dry, but it can be dug deeper. The soil, it's good. It's just thirsty." He stood up, wiping his hands on his pants. He turned to her, and for the first time, she saw a light in his eyes that was not just about survival. It was creation. He knelt before her, as if he were at an altar. He took her chapped, raw hands in his. "We can start here," he said. Clara looked at his hands, scarred and strong, holding hers, which were scarred and new. She looked at the ruined land. She looked at the man who had stood for her. She squeezed his hands. "We'll finish here." They began the work. It was not fast, and it was not romantic. It was brutal, back-breaking labor. They were rebuilding a life from the salvage. Wyatt, his wound still healing, taught her how to set a foundation stone. He showed her how to use an adze, how to square the half-burnt, warped logs from the old cabin. She was a quick study. Her body, hardened by the kitchen in Leadville, was strong. She worked beside him, day after day, under the merciless, open sun. They did not talk much. They did not have to. Their partnership was in the shared rhythm of the work, the thud of his hammer, the scrape of her pulling the old nails. She would hand him a tool before he asked for it. He would steady a log for her before she stumbled. Her scarred hands found his. They were building a house, but they were also building a new kind of trust, a trust made of shared sweat and calluses, and the simple, profound act of staying. In a month, they had walls, they had a roof. It was not the house she remembered. It was a small, tight, one-room cabin, with a solid door and a single window. It was a fortress. They moved in. They had 2 bedrolls, a single pot, and the clothes on their backs. It was a palace. That first night, the prairie wind moaned outside, the same wind that had almost killed her. But inside, it was still. They built a fire in the new stone hearth. Clara was unpacking the small bundle of her possessions. At the bottom, folded with a strange, new reverence, was the veil. It was no longer a shroud. It was no longer a reminder of her shame. It was a battle flag. It was the scrap of lace she had thrown at a tyrant's feet. It was the bandage that had saved Wyatt's life. Wyatt was banking the fire. He watched her. She took the veil and unfolded it. It was full of holes, stiff with old blood and dirt. She walked to the single, empty window. They had no glass for it yet, just a wooden shutter. She tacked the veil over the opening. The moonlight streamed through it, through the holes and the tattered netting. It cast strange, beautiful, broken shadows on the floor. It was not to remember. It was to remind herself. It was to remind herself that she had been hunted, and she had been broken, and she had been afraid, and she had survived. The first season was the hardest. The summer heat was a physical weight, a branding iron on the land they had claimed. The cabin was a box of trapped heat, but it was theirs. They worked from the first gray light of dawn until the sky was a deep, bruised purple. Too tired to speak, their partnership a silent rhythm of shared labor. They dug the well deeper, Wyatt's shoulders straining against the rock, Clara hauling the buckets, her hands, already scarred from the saloon, now cracking and calloused from the rope. They found a new language. It was not the desperate whispers in the snow-filled cave, or the frantic vows in the preacher's tent. It was the simple, practical offering of a canteen. It was the way he would steady the beam she was lifting, his hand covering hers for just a second, his touch firm and impersonal. Yet everything, It was the way she would have a plate of hot beans and bacon ready when he came in from clearing the burned cottonwoods. Her presence a quiet, steady answer to the screaming emptiness of the plains. Autumn came, a merciful, golden reprieve. The air turned crisp, and the land, for a few short weeks, was beautiful. A small garden, which she had fought the dry soil to plant, gave them a few withered potatoes and some tough-skinned squash. To Clara, it was a feast. It was the first food she had ever made, pulled from an earth that had tried to kill her. It was in the autumn that Wyatt taught her to shoot. He had traded the mule in the nearest town, a hard-bitten place 20 miles south. For a good Winchester rifle and ammunition, he kept the shotgun for the cabin. He did not teach her like a man teaches a woman, with condescension. He taught her like he would a soldier, because he knew what was coming. Kane had been arrested, but Wyatt knew the law. He knew men like Kane did not stay in jail. The money was too long. The reach was too wide. "You're afraid of it," he said one afternoon, his voice flat. She was holding the rifle, her shoulder flinching from the expected recoil. "It's loud," she said, her voice small. "It's a tool," he replied, his hands adjusting her grip. His touch was practical. "No different from the axe. You don't fear the axe. You just respect where the blade falls. This is the same. You point it. You breathe out. You squeeze. You do not pull. You squeeze. You let the gun do the work." He set up a row of old tins on a fence post. She missed. She missed again. The shot kicking up dust. The sound echoing flatly across the plains. "Again," he said. She fired and fired until her shoulder was a purpled, aching bruise, until her ears rang, and until the smell of gunpowder was etched into her skin. She hated it, but she did not stop. She practiced until she could hit the tin, one after another. The ping of the bullet, a small, satisfying sound of her own power. She was teaching him, too, though neither of them knew it. She was teaching him how to hope again. He had been a man running, a ghost haunted by the brother he had left behind. The man named Jacob. He had been hollowed out by guilt, by a life of taking orders from lesser men, by the certainty that everything good was temporary. He had saved Clara out of a deep, unexamined instinct, but he had not expected to be saved by her. He watched her one evening. She was sitting by the fire, her shorn hair growing out in soft, brown waves. She was mending his shirt, her brow furrowed in concentration, the needle moving with a new, sure grace. She was not a runaway bride. She was not a victim. She was a woman, his wife. She was here. She had not run, even when he was a dying, fevered weight in the straw. She looked up, catching his eye, and she offered him a small, tired smile. That night, he told her about Jacob. He told her about the saloon, the fight he had walked away from, the guilt that had driven him across the territory. He spoke into the darkness, his voice rough, expecting her to recoil from his failure. She just listened. When he was done, the silence stretched, heavy with his confession. She moved, and her hand found his in the dark. "You didn't leave me, Wyatt," she whispered. "You stayed. Jacob, he would have been proud of the man who stayed." He did not weep. It was not his way, but something in his chest, a cold, hard knot he had carried for years. Finally, gently, uncoiled. He was not just the man who ran, he was the man who stayed. Winter came like a judgment. The sky turned to iron, and the snow buried them. The world shrank to the four walls of their cabin. They were utterly, completely alone. They survived on dried meat from a deer Wyatt had shot, and on Clara's hoarded, precious potatoes. The cold was a living thing, a predator scratching at the door. But the cabin held. The walls they had built together stood fast. The fire in the hearth they had laid did not go out. And in that enforced, profound isolation, their bond, which had been forged in violence and flight, was annealed in peace. They were no longer two scarred people. They were one. Spring returned. The snow melted. The creek began to run, and the impossible, vibrant green of new grass pushed through the mud. Clara's garden, planted with new seed, sprouted. It was a promise. They had survived. They were building a life. The past was a scar, but it was a scar that had healed over. Until the night the storm came back. It was a late spring storm, a torrent of cold, driving rain that turned the yard to a sea of mud. It was the kind of night that reminded them of their fragility. But the cabin was warm, the fire high. Wyatt was cleaning the rifle, a ritual of peace. Clara was banking the embers for the night. That is when she heard it, above the howl of the wind, above the drumming of the rain on the roof. Hoofbeats, not the steady, rhythmic plod of a traveler. A horse running hard, desperate, a horse that was stumbling. Clara froze, her hand on the iron poker. She looked at Wyatt. He had already stopped his work. His head was up, his eyes on the door. He had heard it, too. The peace of the last year evaporated in a single, cold second. The sickness was back. Wyatt set the rifle down. He stood, his movements fluid, and picked up the shotgun that rested on its pegs by the door. He checked the load. 2 shells. Double-aught. He looked at Clara. Go to the back wall. Stay away from the window. She did not move. She just stared at the door. The hoofbeats were closer. In their yard. A frantic, churning sound in the mud, then a thud and a wet, heavy sound as a man fell. Stay back, Clara, Wyatt said, his voice the low, deadly command she remembered from Leadville. But she was not the girl from Leadville. She was not the girl from the ravine. No, Clara said, her voice quiet but clear. This is my land. This is my house. She reached for the rifle, the one he had taught her to use. Her hands did not shake. This time, she said, I speak. Wyatt looked at her, at the absolute certainty in her eyes. This was the woman he had taught. He nodded, a single, sharp motion. He handed her the shotgun instead. It was a close-quarters weapon. He took the rifle. A man was pounding on the door. A weak, frantic drumming. Clara! Clara! Let me in! For God's sake! Clara! It was his voice, Malcolm Kane. It was not the voice of power. It was the voice of a drowning man, thin, reedy, and terrified. Wyatt moved to the side of the door. Clara stood in the center of the room, the shotgun held steady at her hip. Open it, she said. Wyatt pulled the heavy bar. The door swung open on its leather hinges, letting in a blast of cold, wet wind. Malcolm Kane collapsed into the room. He did not walk in. He fell, sprawling onto the wooden floor, landing in a heap of mud and expensive, torn broadcloth. He was alone. He was not the king from Leadville. He was a fugitive. His fine silver hair was matted with mud and blood. His face was gaunt, his eyes wide and wild with terror. One arm was bound in a bloody, makeshift sling. He had escaped. He looked up, gasping. From the floor, he saw Wyatt, standing over him with the rifle, and he saw Clara, standing in the firelight, holding the shotgun. They were after me. Kane choked, trying to push himself up. He was weak. The men I hired, they turned, said I was bad money. They took everything. They're hunting me. He saw the look on their faces. No pity, no welcome, just judgment. He tried a new tactic. He dragged himself toward Clara, his good hand outstretched. Clara, my child, thank God. I knew I could find you. I knew you would not turn me away. Clara did not move. The shotgun did not waver. Get up, Mr. Kane. Clara, please, he begged, his voice wet with rain and desperation. They'll kill me. You must hide me. It is your duty. Before God, I am your husband. I am not your wife, Clara said, her voice as cold as the rain. The law, he shrieked, his terror turning to his old, familiar rage.
The law says you are. The judge, my judge, he voided that farce of a marriage in Leadville. He ruled for me. This land, this house, it is mine. By law, by the marriage contract.
He pointed a shaking, bloody finger at Wyatt.
He is a trespasser, an outlaw. He is wanted for murder, Harlan's murder. They will hang him. Clara, but I can protect you. I can protect you both. Just say you are my wife. Come with me. I have money hidden. We can go to California. Just be mine.
He was pathetic. He was broken and bloody, and he was still trying to buy her, to own her, to rule her with paper and fear. Clara stepped forward. She stepped out of the cabin, past him, onto the porch, into the driving rain. She wanted him off her land. She wanted him out of her house.
Mr. Kane,
she said, her voice carrying over the storm. She was not hiding behind the bar. She was not hiding in the shadows. She was standing in the open, on her own land. Kane pulled himself up. Using the doorframe, he staggered out into the mud to face her. The rain plastered his thin hair to his skull.
You have no law here,
Clara told him, the shotgun held loosely, its barrels pointed at the mud.
You have no papers that matter. You have no rights. That land you wanted, it died with my father. I am not his, and I am not yours.
You, Kane's face contorted. He had nothing left, no money, no power, no law. He had only his rage. He looked at her, this woman who had defied him, who had beaten him, who stood there with her own land, her own home, and her own man. She had everything, he had nothing.
If I cannot have you, he roared, a raw, animal sound. No one will!
He lunged. He did not have a gun. He lunged with his body, his good hand clawed, aiming for her throat. Wyatt fired. The rifle's crack was sharp, a counterpoint to the thunder. The bullet tore through the shoulder of Kane's lunging arm. It did not stop him. He was a man possessed, driven by his final, consuming need. He hit Clara, his weight knocking her backward. She fell, the shotgun flying from her hands. He was on her, his one good hand, bloody and slick, closing around her throat.
I'll kill you,
he choked out. Clara, pinned in the mud, her head slamming against the porch step, clawed at his face. She felt the shotgun near her hip. She did not aim. She did not think. She reacted. She did what Wyatt had taught her. She grabbed the stock and the trigger. She squeezed. The roar of the shotgun was a deafening, final thunderclap. It was aimed up, at the man who was on top of her. The double-aught blast was brutal, and it was absolute. Malcolm Kane was thrown backward, as if by an invisible, giant hand. He landed on his back in the mud, his eyes wide, staring at the black, rain-filled sky. He did not move again. The silence that fell was more profound than the noise. There was only the sound of the rain, washing the blood from Clara's face, washing the mud from Kane's open eyes. Wyatt was at her side in an instant. He pulled her up, his face a mask of terrible, controlled fear.
Are you? I'm all right,
she gasped, shaking, pulling away from the body. She looked down. Kane was dead. He had died in the mud, at her feet, on the land he had tried to steal.
There was no celebration.
Wyatt took her inside. He cleaned the mud from her face. They sat by the fire, wrapped in a blanket, and just waited. They waited for the dawn. Days later, a sheriff and 2 deputies rode in. They had been tracking Kane. They had found his horse, lame, miles back. They saw the fresh grave on the hill. Wyatt told the story. Simply, factually, he had fled. He had attacked. Clara spoke. He tried to kill me. It was self-defense. The sheriff, a hard-bitten, practical man, looked at the small, sturdy cabin. He looked at the new-tilled garden. He looked at Clara's raw hands and at Wyatt's steady, unblinking eyes. He had seen men like Kane before. Self-defense, he agreed. Nodding, he made a note in a small book. He did not seem particularly sad. He and his men did not even dismount. They turned their horses and rode away. It was finished. That night, Clara went to the window. The veil was still there, but the shotgun blast, fired from inside the room, had torn a ragged, gaping hole through the center of it. She took it down, the tattered, filthy, bloody, bullet-holed scrap of lace. She folded it, and she set it on the rough, hand-carved wooden mantel above the hearth. It was not a memory. It was a trophy. Wyatt, beside her, took his skinning knife. He found a clean spot on the mantel, and slowly, with deep, careful cuts, he carved 2 words into the wood. Clara. Wyatt. They lived simply. They lived quietly. The land was not easy. The winters were hard. But the garden grew. The cabin held. They were not 2 broken people. They were just people. Scarred. Yes, but whole. One night, years later, they were sitting on the porch, the sky a vast, cold spray of stars, the same stars that had watched them in the ravine, in the snow. They were older. Their hands were maps of their work. She leaned her head on his shoulder. The peace of the night was so deep, so profound, so earned. She whispered, her voice soft with the memory of a different life. Don't stop. She was not talking about a kiss. She was talking about the crickets, about the smell of the dry grass, about the steady beat of his heart beneath her ear. I've waited too long. He put his arm around her, pulling her close. His promise, made so long ago, was now just a simple, unshakable fact. I'm not leaving. And this time there was no veil between them. Thank you for listening to our story. We would love for you to comment where you are listening from and connect with others. Subscribe to the From Wild West channel and share your thoughts.